Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RDX Sports Podcast. I'm Simon Head, giving you the final word on UFC London. It was a big night at the O2 Arena, lots of Brits involved on the fight card, but let's be honest, it didn't go according to plan for a good number of the Brits on the card. Tough night for the British crowd, and the whole event just felt a little flat, might be a little bit harsh. It just didn't have that extra level of energy that we normally get from a UFC London show. The finishes were at a premium. We didn't get too many. And on a night that was packed with decisions, those crucial fights that people were really hoping to see British winners, we didn't get them. And let's take a look at that main event of the evening. Sean Brady defeating Leon Edwards in the main event. Submission due to guillotine choke. 1 minute 39 in round number 4. Let's be honest, guys, this was a domination by Sean Brady. Leon Edwards had that subpar performance against Belal Muhammad back at UFC 304, and all suggestions were that that was down to fighting at 5 in the morning. The build-up to the fight was very unusual, being that the fight took place in the UK, but on US primetime. How would it go back on regular time zone? Leon came into this with a point to prove, but on fight night, he just had no answer to Sean Brady. Now, I wouldn't put this down to Leon having a bad night. I'll put this down to Sean Brady doing exactly what he game planned for and putting in the best performance of his career. First round, he stood and threw strikes with Leon far more than I thought he would. Maybe that was part of the game plan, just to get Leon more comfortable with the fact that Brady would potentially be standing there throwing strikes at him. And really, I felt like that first round was almost Brady sort of setting the trap almost for rounds 2, 3, and the beginning of round 4. Because I think Leon maybe shaded that first round, landed more strikes, looked far more aggressive than we've seen of late, actually. In the first couple of minutes of that round, really seemed to be getting into his flow state early, getting those strikes out early, landing and finding the range, and it was looking quite positive. And then right at the end of the round, we saw a Sean Brady takedown. Didn't have time to do anything with it, but we saw the takedown, and that was really a little glimpse of what was to come as the fight wore on. Rounds 2 and 3 were almost identical. Sean Brady getting a very, very early takedown, getting the fight to the mat, and completely dominating Leon Edwards on the mat. Now, word for Leon's defense on the mat against someone like Sean Brady, who is an elite grappler. He is by far the best grappler in the sort of the upper echelons of that UFC welterweight division. I'd said leading into the fight that I wasn't sure whether Brady would be able to get the fight to the mat, but if he could, he was far more dangerous a proposition than the likes of Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, and Belal Muhammad. And that's how it actually turned out. Brady, from the minute the fight hit the mat, was going one-way ticket to submission town. He was just, all he was interested in was creating openings and looking to attack. There was no stalling. There was no lay and pray. There was none of that. There was no killing time, just looking to bank rounds. From the minute or the second that the fight hit the mat, Brady was going for the finish. And it meant that Leon was on the defensive the entire time and was unable to get back to his feet. We're not used to seeing that. Even in fights where Leon gets taken down, he normally does a really good job of getting back to his feet, working himself into a position to get up. But such is the level of Sean Brady's grappling that by trying to get up, you leave yourself openings, especially for chokes where you expose your neck as you start to try and get up off the floor. And Brady is an absolute master at that. And I think Leon was almost content in some situations to not take the risk of getting submitted in order to ride out the end of a round. Certainly, he didn't want to take too many risks towards the end of a round because he knew that the clock was on his side and the next round would start standing up again. But in the middle of those rounds, it was tough sledding for Leon Edwards because Brady was just constant pressure, looking for kimuras, looking for chokes, just pressuring the whole time, and it was just gradually breaking down Leon Edwards. You know, stuck on his back for all of round 2, stuck on his back for all of round 3, and then in round 4, I think it might even have been a Leon Edwards takedown attempt, which is incredible to think that he was the one going for the takedown that eventually ended up with him on the mat and the fight being finished. But Sean Brady getting the fight to the mat again, working himself into a mounted guillotine choke. And once he got it locked up, there was no escape, and Leon had to tap to the submission 99 seconds into that fourth round. Now, let's talk about Leon Brady. Liam Brady, former Irish international footballer. Sean Brady, great performance from Sean Brady. What does that mean for him? He deserves to be right there for a title shot next. The only thing that counts against him is the fact that championship picture at 170 pounds is just so crowded. You've got Jack Della Maddalena challenging Bilal Muhammad for the belt at UFC 315. We've got Shavkat Rakhmonov, who was due to challenge Bilal for the belt, but is out injured. He will be back probably later this summer. Then we've got Ian Machado Gary, who is coming off a loss to Shavkat, but is absolutely in that mix. Anybody who thinks he isn't is deluded. He is right up there in the mix for a potential shot at the title. He's going to need another win, but if he gets it, he's right there as well. And now you've got Sean Brady, who's made that leap. Let's not forget, he took this fight on a couple of weeks' notice. He's ranked 5th in the UFC. And I asked him leading into the fight, the fact that he's 5th and that any win and any loss can have a big effect on your ranking at this point. Was it that much of a risk to take? A short notice fight against the number one contender? He said he'd been preparing for Edwards for months, maybe years, because he was the guy at the top of the division. He knew that he had the game to beat Leon. He saw that from the way that Bilal handled him at UFC 304. And if Bilal's performance against Leon is the new benchmark, Brady just surpassed it by leaps and bounds. That was far and away superior to what we saw from Bilal at UFC 304. He went in there. There was no holding. There was no forcing the action against occasion, just killing time. Brady was going for the finish for every second of that fight. And he deserves all the respect. I think he got a pretty good amount of respect from the UK crowd. Obviously, they wanted Leon to win and were disappointed. They were leaving the arena in their droves when the fight finished. But those who stayed certainly gave plenty of due respect to Sean Brady, who congratulations to him, just become a new father, and he's going to be taking home a performance of the night bonus and top contender status in the welterweight division back home to Philadelphia with his wife and his newborn. So nothing but good things happening in Sean Brady's life right now. Absolute class act to deal with during fight week as well. Really enjoyed talking to him at Media Day, and he's going to be a real problem at 170 pounds. I think the biggest problem he's going to have is if he finds himself against someone with really top draw striking who's able to control the range a little better than Leon did. In that situation, I think you can nullify a lot of his threat if you can keep him at distance. But if the fight goes to the floor, he's the most dangerous man in the division. There is no doubt about it. So looking forward to seeing how all that shakes out, and obviously looking forward to seeing how that main event shakes out at UFC 315. But a fantastic performance at UFC London by Sean Brady. Sean Brady getting the win. Obviously, that was the A side. He goes on and he will probably either contend for the title next or face a number one contender fight in order to move himself forward in that welterweight division and get that shot at the 170-pound title. As for Leon Edwards, it's crossroads time, right? It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this goes, what happens next. That's 2 in a row he's lost, but obviously the fact that he lost 2 in a row elsewhere in the UFC, you start to raise some question marks. These are just the elite of the division. So the question now is how the UFC book him moving forward in the welterweight division. I'm just going to pull up the rankings while I'm talking to you right here and take a look at the welterweight division as of just about 3 p.m. on a Monday after UFC London. Leon is currently still ranked number 1. That, I'm sure, is due to change. Sean Brady will probably bump himself up to either the number 1 or the number 2 spot. So I'd be very interested to see where Brady finds himself in a few hours' time. Will the rankings panel put him above Shavkat or just below him? That'll be interesting to see. But I think we're going to see Shavkat and Brady as the top 2 contenders. And it'll be very interesting to see who they put at number 1 in the welterweight division. But looking at potential matchups for Leon Edwards, further down the line, you've got Joachim Buckley at number 6. You've got Ian Machado Gary at number 7. Now, I think Ian Machado Gary's ranking is a false ranking on ability. Obviously, body of work, it's slightly different because very rarely do you see someone rise up the rankings off the back of a loss. But as I said in a previous podcast here with RDX Sports, that sometimes when you lose, you really win. Like the great Rosie Perez said in White Men Can't Jump. And I think that's exactly what happened with Ian Machado Gary in that fight with Shavkat, who he was super competitive in that fight. And a couple of little tweaks in that matchup, he wins that fight. So he's without doubt a top 5 welterweight in my eyes. So I think he's in there in the mix. Will they put Leon against someone like that? Or are we looking further down the line again? Are we looking at your Gilbert Burnses, your Jeff Neals, your Wonder Boys, people like this? Once you get to Wonder Boy, you're outside the top 10. So really interested to see what happens for Leon next. Leon may even take stock of his career and decide he wants to go a different route. We don't know. What we do know is that that was not his best night at the O2 for sure. Was it down to him not performing well, or was it down to Brady just being absolutely stellar on the night? I would lean towards the latter. I would always try and give the credit to the winning fighter wherever possible. And in a fight like that really Brady made it look one-sided, in a fight that really shouldn't have been one-sided on paper, I thought that was an outstanding performance from him. We'll see what happens with Leon next. Fingers crossed we see him back in the cage and we see him back on form again, because he's been a loyal servant to UK MMA, and there's been plenty of that time where he hasn't been given the due respect that he deserved. I mean, I remember him walking out to face Gunnar Nelson, and the crowd were on Gunnar Nelson's side in the UK, and that blows your mind really when you think that here's a UK fighter, trains in the UK, has come up completely through the UK, and he goes in there with an Icelandic guy, and they're cheering him over the British fighter. I thought that was a real shame. He's gone on and done incredible things since. His win over Kamaru Usman to capture the UFC welterweight title will live on as one of the greatest come-from-behind wins in UFC title fight history. And he went on and solidified his championship status with 2 really good title defenses before eventually he dropped the belt to Bilal at UFC 304. So, fingers crossed we see Leon go back to the drawing board, take a bit of time out, take some time away, spend some time with the family, and just unplug for a while, reassess, and then maybe come back towards the end of the year. But I don't think this is the end for Leon, not by a long shot. Whether he can get back into championship contention again, who knows? He's probably going to need 2 or 3 big wins against ranked opposition to do it. And the top of that welterweight division looks like an absolute shark tank at the moment. So it's going to be a tough ask for him, but there's some interesting fights out there if he wants them. So we'll see how that goes for Leon Edwards. Not his night at UFC London, but we'll see what happens for him as the year rolls on. All right, let's take a look at the co-main event. Light heavyweight contenders went head-to-head. Carlos Ulberg getting the judges' nod over Jan Blachowicz in a really competitive, closely contested fight that went all the way. 29-28 across the board for Black Jag, who gets a win against a former champion. A feather in the cap for Carlos Ulberg. Not the finish that he would have been looking for, but when you consider that Alex Pereira couldn't finish him, and when you consider that Magomed Ankalaev, who is the current champion of the division, he couldn't finish Jan Blachowicz either, it's not a huge negative mark against Carlos Ulberg's name that he wasn't able to do that either. But this was a super close fight, and I know that there were some people that thought that Jan had actually done enough to win the fight. I'll be honest, I was flipping between watching the fight and producing reports. There was a big piece of news that broke broke before that fight we were dealing with, so had to deal with that at the time. But Ulberg versus Blachowicz was a good, close, competitive fight. Maybe it didn't catch fire in the way that some people were hoping for, but it was a good, solid win and an important win for Ulberg, who will be nudging his way up that UFC light heavyweight division. Again, we take a look at the light heavyweight rankings. You've got Magomed Ankalaev obviously sitting there at the top. Alex Pereira, who will be rematching him later this year, we think, probably in Abu Dhabi. He's at number 1. Yuri Prohaska, who was in London, by the way. Big fan of Yuri Prohaska. Bumped into him a couple of times during fight week. Lovely guy. Very cool and calm, as you see on the internet. He's exactly the same in real life. He's ranked at number 2. Jan Blachowicz was ranked 3rd. And Carlos Ulberg, who was 6th, has just beaten him. So you would imagine Ulberg will jump up and probably leapfrog him and sit in that number 3 spot. Then all you've got ahead of him is former champion and more former champions. You've got Yuri Prohaska at 2, Alex Pereira at 1, and then the current champion of the world, Magomed Ankalaev. So we'll see. We will see what happens. But Prohaska being there does make you wonder whether he might be next. So Prohaska versus Ulberg. That'd be an interesting fight because Ulberg, traditional kickboxer, very slick, very relaxed, but excellent accuracy on his strikes. Very comfortable in the pocket, great movement. Taking on someone like Yuri Prohaska, who is as unorthodox as they come, throws punches from all over the place, and has incredible power and a very difficult style to prepare for because there aren't many people out there who fight like big Yuri Prohaska. So that's a fight that I would love to see. I think that would be a great fight. I'd also love to see Yuri Prohaska versus Magomed Ankalaev. There's been a lot of banter between those two. Well, is it between those two? Between Yuri and probably Ali Abdelaziz, who I'm pretty sure is running Magomed's Twitter account right now. But Yuri's been having a back and forth with Magomed's Twitter account, and that's a fight that I think we would all like to see as well. But it looks like it's going to be the Pereira rematch first, and we'll see what happens after that. But Carlos Ulberg, after that win on Saturday, probably moving into the top 3 at light heavyweight. He's a contender for real in the UFC's light heavyweight division. Looking a bit further down the card, at welterweight, we have Kevin Holland versus Gunnar Nelson. And the dog next door seems to really enjoy this matchup, as you can probably hear. We'll move on. Regardless, Holland versus Gunnar Nelson was one of those fights where it's very difficult to pick. You had the most, I think I'll build it during the week as the most active man in the UFC versus probably one of the most inactive men in the UFC. Kevin Holland will fight every other week if you'd let him. Gunnar Nelson was making his return after 2 years away. Averages a fight every year, at least, well, one every year, one every couple of years. Spoke to him during the week. He'd actually like to make a quick turnaround and maybe have another one quite soon. We haven't seen much of Gunnar. Everyone loves Gunnar. Everyone loves watching him fight. He's got a great fighting style, very different from what we're used to seeing in the octagon. But he's a fascinating character. He's a fascinating fighter to watch. And his matchup with Kevin Holland was one that really intrigued me because not so much because of Gunnar, because you kind of know what you're going to get. It's more how his opponents adapt to his style. And Kevin just took the fight to him immediately. It was a great matchup. Kevin found himself in some disadvantageous positions on the mat at points and did a superb job. His grappling is hugely underrated. And he did enough to stay out of major trouble against Gunnar Nelson. If you give Gunnar Nelson the shot, a sniff of a submission, he will snatch it up and take one of your limbs home with him, or he'll be choking you to sleep. But Kevin Holland did a really, really good job. There was a funny moment where he had Gunnar Nelson wrapped up in I think it was an omoplata, had his arm completely wrapped up, and Nelson couldn't really do much to get out of it, so he just stood up and lifted him up like a handbag. And they had a little verbal exchange. I think Kevin Holland said something to him, and Nelson just sort of looked down at him and had a bit of a giggle. So very, very funny moment just watching that sort of thing happen in the middle of a professional fist fight in a cage. But yeah, it was great to watch. Great performance from both guys, given that Gunnar had been out for so long. Great performance from Holland, who, don't underestimate that performance. He had 2 fights at middleweight, lost them both in his last 2. The second one being to a submission specialist in Rainier Derrida. As I said, at middleweight, he completed a 2-month turnaround, which is nothing. Dropped weight to welterweight, made weight with ease. I mean, he was walking around happy as Larry. Probably 45 minutes before the weigh-in, we were all sitting in the sort of the waiting area, and Holland came along and was sort of chatting away to everybody and looked absolutely as fresh as a daisy. There's some other fighters walking around sort of dried out, looking like death warmed up. Holland looked absolutely like he was about to go off for a jog. He looked absolutely fine. And at that point, it was like, okay, he looks in great nick. This is going to be a really good fight. I was worried about dropping the weight on 2 weeks' notice, but I did not need to worry at all. Great performance from Kevin Holland. Really good performance. And I don't know whether all of the O2 crowd really got that fight. The ones that are sort of like long-time hardcore MMA fans would have absolutely loved it. And I thoroughly enjoyed that fight. That was one of the most enjoyable fights of the night for me personally. I love watching that fight. And all credit to Kevin Holland for getting the win. Superb performance from the Trailblazer, who he every time he gets in the cage, you know he's going to give you something. And he gave us a great performance on Saturday against Gunnar Nelson, who, fingers crossed, we won't have to wait 2 years for his next performance in the octagon. All right, working down the card, we had the women's strawweight fight between Molly McCann and Alexia Thainara. Now, Molly McCann was due to take on Estela Nunes in that 115-pound fight, but 1 week out from the fight, Nunes pulled out, and in stepped Contender Series graduate Alexia Thainara for her UFC debut on 1 week's notice against Molly McCann, who is fighting on home soil. That is a big way to make your debut. She turned up for media day in a Mickey Mouse onesie. That's pretty much the first thing I said to her. She sat down like, "Welcome to London, love the onesie," and then started talking to her about her fight. And she looked as relaxed as can be. And then one of the great walkouts for a UFC debutant. Like, if you remember Chris Curtis, the big heavyweight who likes to bust a few moves on the way to the cage, her walkout made him look like he was just making a casual stroll. He looked boring compared to what Thainara was doing. She bust out every dance move in the book as she made her way to the cage. And it was getting to the point where everyone's thinking, this is your debut on short notice. You're on the big stage on a main card in London, away from home, and you're doing all this. You know, number one, save some gas tank. And number two, with all of this, you better win because you're going to look a little bit foolish. But we didn't need to worry because Alexia Thainara looks like a very dangerous proposition at 115 pounds. Put on a great performance, shut down Molly McCann, submitted her with a rear naked choke with 28 seconds left in the round, and celebrated almost as wildly as she did on the way to the cage after the fight. Great performance from her. Hard not to be excited for what's in the future for her, and hard not to root for someone with that much enthusiasm and joy for the sport, a sport that can be very serious, and there's a lot of bad blood and there's a lot of nastiness knocking around in combat sports, especially in MMA. She was a breath of fresh air, and she came in and was a lot of fun. But when it came down to business, she delivered, and she did so in brilliant fashion. So credit to her. Genuinely looking forward to seeing how they book Alexia Thainara next. I think that's like 8 submissions to her name now, or 9 maybe. But that was super impressive. Then we turn to Molly McCann, who I know not everybody is a Molly McCann fan. I know sometimes people found she kind of got associated with Paddy Pimblett, and Paddy Pimblett is a bit of a Marmite character for some. I'm quite close. Obviously, I'm in the UK, right? So I'm close to the UK market. I've watched both of these fighters come up through the domestic scene, through Cage Warriors, and you know, I've had the chance to chat to both of them over the years, and you know, I think they're both good people. I think they're both really grounded, and I think that when success hit them, they were just having the time of their lives and having fun. And sometimes when people are having fun and they get a bit loud and a little bit rambunctious in that fun, people can turn against that. And I think there was a little bit of that with Paddy and Molly at one point, but that's not who the real Molly McCann is. And she's even when we spoke to her media day, she was very quiet, very reserved. And she even said to me during the media day, she says, you've watched me grow up in front of your own eyes over the course of my career. And I have. And it was interesting to see. I did wonder as soon as the fight finished whether we might see a retirement from Molly. And as soon as I saw her taking her gloves off, I thought, okay. And then when she starts hugging Bruce Buffer, then it was pretty much, it was pretty clear that she was gonna call time on her career. Gave a really heartfelt, passionate speech after the fight. I know some people latched on to the fact that she said she transcended the sport. And some people have picked up on that and said that she's deluded and all the rest of it. That's not what she meant. That's not what she didn't mean it like that. What she was saying by saying that she transcended the sport, I think what she was trying to say was that this girl from Liverpool who used to work in a subway used to play a bit of football back in the day, did a bit of boxing back in the day, switched to MMA, which I think would have been her third sport, right? And then became a world champion in Cage Warriors, made history as the first ever Cage Warriors women's flyweight champion. Goes onto the global stage with the UFC and fights in big arenas on big cards and produces some of the most spectacular performances we've seen from a British fighter in a cage. You know, you think some of those knockouts, the spinning back elbow knockout. You know, who was it? She KO'd. She knocked out two. She beat Hannah Goldie, but before then, she defeated. Let's get it right. Luana Carolina. That's who it was. Luana Carolina at Volkov versus Aspinall at the O2 with a spinning back elbow, and then back at the O2 later that same year in 2022, spinning back elbow again, leading to a finish of Hannah Goldie at the O2. Back-to-back performance of the night. That was that was a life-changing year for Molly McCann. She had a couple of losses after that. Dropped to strawweight, beats Diana Belbita, loses to Bruna Brazil at UFC 304 last time out, and then on Saturday gets subbed in the first round by debutant Alexia Thainara. And I think the thing that people focused on about the delusion thing was just completely wrong and out of context. What she's saying is she's opened up the sport of MMA to a demographic here in the UK that previously had not, probably would never have touched the sport. And I think that's the thing. You know, she's a role model in so many ways to so many different demographics in this country, and she should be celebrated as that. And someone who, win, lose or draw, would go out there and fought with her heart on her sleeve and gave absolutely everything that she had. And the one thing, you know, some people might criticize her for not being good enough against certain people, or a skill set not being advanced enough, or whatever it might be. From a technical standpoint, people will pick that apart, and that's fine. People can do that. But the one thing that nobody can do is question Molly's heart. No one can question her commitment, and no one can question her passion and her just being genuine. What you see is what you get with Molly McCann, and honestly, she has been an absolute pleasure to deal with through her entire career. She's had ups and downs, but she's been an absolute star for this part of the world. And I know not everybody is a Molly fan. I am, and I'm genuinely proud to have been able to cover her career. And I'm pleased that, okay, she goes out on a loss, but she's gone out under her own steam, so to speak. She took the decision before someone took it for her. She wasn't cut from the UFC. She decided that for herself that she wasn't competing at the level that she feels the UFC and the fans deserve. So, and that takes a lot of humility to do that. And that I think is that for me should be the big takeaway of her post-fight speech, rather than taking one word and taking it somewhat out of context. The truth is, she's very, very humble. She does have her feet on the ground, and I actually think she would be an outstanding, fighter relations person for the UFC. Someone who could act as a bridge between, especially debuting fighters who come into the promotion, who are getting used to life in the UFC. The UFC is this big traveling circus. It's a machine. You go from an event in London to this week's event in Mexico City, and you look at the processes around that event and what you do as a fighter when you arrive and everything you do towards fight night. By and large, it's the same whether you're in London, Mexico, Amsterdam, Vegas, New York. The process is largely the same. The UFC have got it down to a fine art now. But for someone who hasn't been involved in that before, it takes a little getting used to, especially if you come from the regional scene where maybe there isn't a great media presence and you haven't had those obligations you have to deal with, and you don't have to do a lot of promotional stuff to camera. Molly, I think, would be a great person for that side of the UFC in particular. And I would love, from a personal standpoint, I think it would be great for her to still be involved in the sport. I think, as I said, I put a tweet up and pinned it to my profile. I think she's too good of a person for the sport to lose. So I really hope that there is a place somewhere in the sport, assuming that that's what Molly would like to do. I really do hope that there's a place in the sport for her, because I think she's given so much. But I also think, without wanting to bleed her dry, I think there's still lots more that Molly can give to the sport of mixed martial arts, especially in this part of the world. If that's something that she'd like to do, I think it would be a travesty if there wasn't a way for her to be able to do that. So, Molly McCann, tip of the hat to you. You've had an incredible career, a real roller coaster. You've experienced the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. But that knockout of Luana Carolina will live in long in the memory. And just watching everybody's jaws drop when you basically did it again the very next time we saw you in the same building, that will stick with me forever. So enjoy your retirement, and I really hope that isn't the last we see of you in the sport of mixed martial arts, even if it isn't in the cage anymore. So congrats on a great career, and happy trails to Molly McCann. All right, let's take a look at the two fights at the very beginning of the main card. I had these two fights down as my two picks as the best two fights of the night. Let's start with the one that opened the main card, Nathaniel Wood versus Morgan Charrier. I thought this was an outstanding matchup on paper. It was an outstanding matchup in real life as well. Nathaniel Wood getting the unanimous decision win, 30-27s across the board. If you looked at that on paper, you think, wow, Wood dominated. He didn't dominate, but he was the better man on the night for sure. The thing that I'd said about Morgan Charrier coming into the fight is that if there was one aspect of his game that might cause him problems, is that he tends to fight to the level he's at, or he tends to fight to the energy of his opponent. So if you're pushing harder towards him, he'll push hard back. If you're backed away, he'll kind of keep his distance as well. So it's sort of yin versus yin rather than yin and yang, you know what I mean? So sometimes that means that he can almost be lulled into losing decisions. But when he pushes the fight, he's a real force to be reckoned with, especially at 145, where he's a big, strong lad at 145 pounds. He had the size and strength advantage against Nathaniel Wood on Saturday night. But the thing that we said leading into that fight, and the thing that Nathaniel told us at media day, and he conceded that he was losing size to Morgan, it was the speed that would be the difference. And we saw it on fight night. Nathaniel Wood was absolutely razor sharp in everything he did. He was a beat quicker than Morgan Charrier in almost every department, scoring a real eye-catching knockdown in that first round, and going on and winning the fight relatively comfortably. But that was a great performance from Nathaniel Wood, who really showed that his move up from bantamweight to featherweight was a very, very well timed and very well thought through decision, because he now looks outstanding at 145 pounds, and he's only getting better. And really did a great job on Morgan Charrier, who I'm very high on as well as a featherweight prospect. So hopefully Morgan will bounce back. They'll put him on the Paris card later this year for that, I am pretty sure. And hopefully he gets the opportunity to bounce back into the win column and move forward again. But yeah, Nathaniel Wood living just down the road from the O2 Arena, training a Great Britain top team under Brad Pickett. Big night for him, big win for him. And, impressive stuff from the prospect, who has teased a new nickname is coming very soon. So keep your eyes open for that. But great stuff from Nathaniel Wood. And following Nathaniel Wood's win against Morgan Charrier, we had the lightweight bout between Chris Duncan and Jordan Vucenic. Former featherweight champion of Cage Warriors, Jordan Vucenic, now fighting at lightweight. Second fight in the UFC. Lost his first one. Well, he lost his second one as well. Chris Duncan from Scotland, ATT stalwart. He's been over there, and now he's gone full time. He seems to have just hit another level in his game. He looked great in his last outing against Blachowicz, getting the guillotine choke victory in that one to earn a performance of the night bonus. And Duncan said that changed his life. Now against Jordan Vucenic, he repeated defeat. Guillotine choke submission, second round, 3 minutes 42 seconds. Outstanding performance from Chris Duncan. And here's the thing, He looks good everywhere. He's exciting coming forward, throwing big shots, has fight-ending punch power. He's got solid wrestling, and he's obviously got decent submission skills in the locker as well. He pushed the pace hard on Jordan Vucenic in that first round, dominated the opening 5 minutes. Vucenic really couldn't get his game underway at all. It was one-way traffic pretty much. And it was all coming from the Flying Scotsman, Chris Duncan. Great performance from him in that first round. Second round, ironically, the finish came just as Jordan Vucenic was starting to get a foothold in the fight. Up to that point, he really hadn't earned any respect from Chris Duncan. He needed to do something to try and stem the tide somewhat. And he managed to he literally started to have some success on the feet, started getting his hands going and was starting to land. He didn't have the punch power that Chris Duncan has, but he does have sharper striking, I think, and starting to really make that tell in the opening couple of minutes of that first round. Was starting to hit and make Duncan miss, and it felt like, okay, we've got a fight now. After that first round, which went very, very, very clearly Chris Duncan's way, it felt like Vucenic was gradually starting to work his way back into the fight. But then he made what turned out to be a fight-ending mistake. He had Duncan up against the cage. He'd hit him with some good strikes. And for some reason, rather than continuing where he was having the success, continuing to strike, he went for the takedown and he just dropped levels straight into a guillotine choke. Duncan was just waiting for him to drop. And as soon as he did, snatches up the guillotine, drops to the mat, applies the squeeze, gets the tap, and that's 2 wins on the spin. For the problem, Chris Duncan, really interesting to see who they book him with next, because he, as his nickname suggests, he's a problem at 155 pounds because he's got the heavy hands. He can knock you out with one shot. You don't treat his striking with respect, you could end up waking up looking at the arena lights. He's also got underrated submission skills, and he's big and strong at the weight class. He's going to be a handful for anybody at 55. Really excited to see how they progress him up that 155-pound division, where, of course, there is no shortage of tough, difficult matchups for him. But let's not forget where he comes from. American Top Team has a mat filled with some of the UFC's greatest lightweights. You take a look at their lightweight rankings. Arman Tsarukyan, ATT, Dustin Poirier, ATT, Matthias Gamrot, ATT, Renato Moicano, ATT. So, excuse me, they are absolutely chock full of top contenders on the mats there at Coconut Creek. Chris Duncan is getting the benefit of working with and alongside those guys, sharpening each other's games. And, the guillotine choke, they're not shy of a guillotine choke down there at ATT. And he got that one absolutely locked in and managed to get the victory. Great performance from Chris Duncan. And that one would have meant a lot to him, carrying on that win streak. And now, potentially, there could be something a little bit bigger down the line for him, perhaps fighting back over in the States later in the year. We shall see. Great main card in terms of the matchups. We didn't get the big highlight reel moments, but every single fight was competitive. And this is the thing, right? When you get tight matchmaking, sometimes you get fighters cancel each other out. Sometimes you do get fights that go to a decision or don't produce that big wow highlight reel moment. I mean, on the entire fight card, I don't think we had a single knockout or single TKO. I can't remember the last time we had a fight in the UK from the UFC fight card with no knockout or TKO on the card. We had 4 finishes. That's all we had, 4 finishes. So it's a long night. Big night for the judges. Judges had to stay pretty busy. But it was all submissions in the finishes. Brady getting the submission. Alexia Thainara getting the submission. Chris Duncan getting the submission. And we have one more submission which came on the prelims, and we needed to shout this one out because this was probably the most spectacular performance of the night. Sean Brady against Puja Tomar delivered the most remarkable sequence of action, I think, on the entire fight card. Puja Tomar throwing some heavy leather, then switched it up with a head kick. And we were looking at it. Sean Brady looked like she was out. From where we were stood at cage side, she looked like she was out. She hit the mat, And then Pooja just dived on her, started raining down heavy ground strikes. The first one seemed to wake up Sean O'Bannon. The next one seemed to knock her out again. The next one seemed to wake her up again. All while the referee, I think it was Lucas Bazaki, was stood there just watching it. And at the time, we were there on press row going, do you want to stop this fight at any point? This looks like she's taking strikes she really shouldn't be taking. And I don't think anyone would have complained if he'd stopped the fight after the head kick, because the way she went down, she looked like she was pretty much out there. But then I think Pooja Thainara probably landed 3 or 4 really clean, hard ground strikes to the head of Sean O'Bannon. And still the fight was allowed to continue. And somehow during that, Shauna was able to get the wherewithal to get a hold of Pooja Thainara and then start to work her way back into the fight. And somehow, after attempting triangle chokes or whatever, just to try and do something off her back, eventually, due to some pretty poor decision making for Pooja, who really should have just got herself out of dodge, to be honest, and just let the fight get back up, or just back off for a bit and then go back down again. But the fact that she tried to engage in the grappling side of it at that point really did give Sean O'Bannon the exit that she needed. And, she managed to get herself out of trouble by putting Pooja on the defense rather than the offense. And then eventually Shauna locks up the armbar for the finish. And there was a big come from behind win, a great come from behind win. She celebrated like someone who had done something pretty special, which she had. And she got a performance of the night bonus for that as well, I believe. And yes, she did. And that's the sort of performance and the sort of win that can change somebody's life. And and Shauna's a lovely character to be around. And to see someone like that get a win like that in a fight that it looked like was going completely the other way for her, all credit to her. That was a great performance from her to come back and get that win on the prelims. So armbar victory, second round, 3 minutes 22. It was the official time in that women's strawweight fight. Very quickly, we'll run down the other results. Chris Padilla defeats Jai Herbert via split decision. I'll be honest, I thought Jai did enough to win that fight, 2 rounds to 1, but 2 of the judges disagreed with that assessment, and Chris Padilla, Taco, gets the win over the Black Country Banger. Lonnie Kavanagh gets the unanimous decision win over Felipe Dos Santos. This was a great fight. I really enjoyed this. Lonnie Kavanagh, for me, is a real star of the making, and I think he's someone who, in the next few years, he's going to ascend to become one of the UK's biggest stars, I think, in the UFC. He is an absolute talent at 125 pounds, and he was against a legit opponent in Felipe Dos Santos, who gave him plenty to think about over the course of that 15 minutes. Lonnie Kavanagh ended the fight with a nasty gash on the top of his head, but he also walked away with the win. Big performance from him, and a good night for Great Britain Top Team. In fact, a good weekend for Great Britain Top Team. We had a whole load of winners at Cage Warriors 186 on Friday night, at the Indigo at the O2 as well. So kudos to Brad Pickett and Ash Grimshaw heading up that team down there at in Morden in southeast London. So great job by them. Great performance from Lonnie Kavanagh, and of course from Nathaniel Wood on the prelims. On the main card. We had Marcin Tybura edging Mick Parkin by unanimous decision in their heavyweight fight. That was Mick Parkin's first defeat as a pro. And to be honest, if you're going to take a defeat, that's as good a defeat as you could hope for, really, because that was a super competitive fight against a really tough, durable, experienced campaigner in the UFC heavyweight division. Someone who's been in and around the top 15 for a long time. Not a big name as such, but a very respected one, and a tough opponent for anybody in the UFC heavyweight division. Parkin could easily have won that fight on another night. It was that close. I think it really came down to how the first round was scored. I thought Tybura did just enough to edge the first round. I thought he was a little bit more active, perhaps looked a little bit more aggressive, was throwing heavier stuff. And I think that's probably what got him the nod on the judges' scorecards for that round. I thought Parkin clearly took the second round. Dominant second round, almost finished the fight at the end of the round. It was that close. And then we had the third round, Marcin Tybura pushing forward against a very tired Parkin to get the job done, 29-28. But all in all, a really good performance from Marcin Tybura. Parkin, I think, will probably look back at that and think that he left a little bit on the table. But I think that's a really good learning fight for him. I think to lose to someone like Tybura, there was a big jump up for him. So to lose to someone like Tybura at this stage, I don't think does him a huge amount of damage. If anything, it does him some help, because it means that it lets him go away and see that there are these small areas that he needs to adjust before his next fight. And I guarantee he'll come back better for the next fight. With the people he's got in his corner and the people he's got around him, you know, the likes of Tom Aspinall, the likes of Phil DeFries, he's going to do absolutely fine. You know, Andrew Fisher, these people are going to really help him. And Mick Parkin will come back a better fighter as a result of losing that bout to Marcin Tybura, who I think, on the balance of it, probably was the right man to get the win on the night. Someone else who got the win on the night, Christian Leroy Duncan, wasn't the most spectacular of performances until the end of the final round, where he really let fly at Andrei Pulayev and really put it on him and looked close, like he might even get a late stoppage to put the capstone on a solid performance, but didn't quite make it that way. But he ended up with a shutout win, 30-27, 30-27, and one judge giving him a 10-8 for 30-26. But solid performance from Christian Leroy Duncan. He wanted to get back to winning ways after last time out, gets that job done, no problems at all. And earlier in the night, Caden Loughran versus Nathan Fletcher went to a split decision. That was a fun fight. I really enjoyed that fight. That was the one thing about the UFC London crowds, they're in early. They're always in early. And when we had Nathan Fletcher from Next Generation MMA, and you got Caden Loughran all there on the second fight of the night, you know that there's a fair amount of fans are going to be in the building early anyway. They gave that a great atmosphere. It was a great fight. Went to the final round. It looked to me like Loughran was going to win it, but then in the last minute or so, Fletcher really let his hands go and looked like he stunned Loughran a couple of times with some big shots late on in that fight. And then it was really a case of, how do you balance that? How do you score that round as a whole? Did those individual shots that Fletcher connected with late on outweigh the good work that Caden Loughran had done through the majority of the round? One judge said yes, gave it to Nathan Fletcher. Two judges said no and gave it to Caden Loughran. So it was Loughran who got the split decision nod, and that was a great fight. I enjoyed that. And the first fight of the night, Caio Fernandes defeating Guram Kutateladze. Two observations from this fight. Guram didn't look like 100% to me. I don't know what it was. He looked to me like, I don't know if he was fighting hurt or he wasn't well. I don't know what it was. It felt to me like he was missing top gear in that fight. It was like there was something there. He just didn't seem to be able to push that extra, where we have seen him do that in previous fights. Fernandes, though, probably took that gear away from him, to be honest, by absolutely decimating the lead leg of Guram Kutateladze with low leg kicks. By the end of the first round, the outside of Guram's calf looked like burger meat. It absolutely smashed it to pieces, and the state of it when he went back to the corner was quite something. But Fernandes fought really well, and looks like someone who potentially could make some waves as he moves up the lightweight division. Will he ever contend for the belt? You know, he said he wants to be a world champion, but at 155 pounds, he's got a lot to do before he can get himself in position for that. But in that fight, I was impressed. He did very well, and, you know, fought to a game plan, didn't take too many risks, and was the clear winner, 30-27s on all three scorecards. That was your preliminary card, and that as a whole was UFC Fight Night London. It was a pleasure to be there. It was a pleasure to cover fight week and to talk to the fighters in the lead up to the fight. The bonuses, Sean Brady, Kevin Holland, Alexia Thainara and Sean Bannon all claiming $50,000 performance of the night bonuses. There was no fight of the night bonus. If I was giving one out, I would probably have given it to Kavanagh versus Dos Santos. I think that was probably the best fight for me. Nathaniel Morgan-Charrier was good. Loughran versus Fletcher was very good as well. So one of those three, I think, were for me, the best ones. Holland versus Nelson was a lot of fun as well. So we had some good ones, but we didn't get, Dana White likes to talk about selling like holy shit moments with the UFC. We didn't get many of them on Saturday night. And there's been some people online and, people from the media and obviously the fans saying that it wasn't a classic UFC London event. We get that sometimes. That's the way it is. Sometimes these fighters cancel each other out. Sometimes those highlight reel moments don't always land. So it is what it is. It is what it is. I guarantee you the next time they come over, we'll have a packed house again. The media will be packed in again. And I'm sure we'll see some more highlight reel moments in the O2 or wherever else in the UK they might potentially take the Octagon. Dave Shaw, the head of international for UFC, did the press conference in Dana's absence on Saturday night and said that the plan is always to do 2 events in the UK per year and that there is every chance that we will still get another UFC event in the UK later in 2025. But that's all I've got time for you on this episode of the RDX Sports Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe right here on the RDX Sports YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow RDX Sports at RDX Sports on X, at RDX_sports on Instagram. And if you're feeling that way inclined, you can chuck me a follow as well. I'm at Simon Head Sport across all social platforms. That's what we have for you this week. We've got UFC Mexico coming up next weekend. I'm away this week, but we'll see if we can cram in an extra podcast on the road. I'm actually in Hong Kong of all places for the Hong Kong Sevens rugby, but don't let that get in the way of a good weekend of mixed martial arts. I will certainly be checking out UFC Mexico, albeit from the other side of the world. So we'll see if we can squeeze in a UFC Mexico preview pod a bit later on this week. But for now, enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the fights coming up this weekend. And I'll be in touch with you a little bit later in the week as we preview UFC Mexico City. Take care.